Russian army. Uneasy relations of Kremlin with generals. In peacetime, army is easily controlled through procedures, but in the war procedural power wanes. Generals become proud and independent, thus you gonna kill them en masse after each war. Most of so-called foreign policy is domestic policy by other means. For this reason I think Putin is reluctant to start a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. During such a war, professional military would get too much power and authority, which might be Kremlin's biggest fear. Thread. Let's go a bit deeper in history. When Bolsheviks took power in 1917, they were constantly comparing themselves with English and French revolutionaries. As they knew well, both English and French revolutions ended with military usurpations done by victorious revolutionary generals. Thus communists were wary of their own officers. E.g., Trotsky noticed a highly capable lieutenant of Red Army Blagorovov and told to Lenin, such a lieutenant could make a new Napoleon, and his surname fits well. Blagorovov is a literal translation of the word Bonaparte. Lenin first laughed and then started thinking, then said seriously and almost threateningly, "Well, we'll overcome these Bonapartes, won't we, with God's help?" Responded Trotsky. Leon Trotsky. My life. That probably explains why the victorious Red Army had so many commanders killed under mysterious circumstances, according to official narrative, by the enemy fire, but suspectedly, by assassins shooting at their back from the close range, like Schurz, or openly killed without any trial like the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Army, Mironov. As some researchers argue, this was personally ordered by Leon Trotsky. At some point during the Civil War, Lenin was discussing executing 100% of all the Red Army commanders, including the commander-in-chief. It would be wrong to assume that all of this was complete paranoia. For example, the commander of the 11th Red Army, Sorokin, indeed tried to raise a rebellion against the Soviet power, arresting and executing a number of communist commissars. They built 2 layers of control to keep the army in line. First, by the party, which was the leading and organizing force of the Soviet state. Every army, regiment, battalion, etc., had a commander and a commissar. Commander was a professional military. Commissar was a political appointee to keep commander in check, to control him, arrest and execute if needed. Any order of a commander had to be confirmed by the commissar. Second, by the state security. Their name evolved. First, Extraordinary Commission Cheka. Second, Main Political Bureau GPU. Then People's Commissariat of Home Affairs NKVD, Ministry for State Security MGB, Committee for State Security KGB, and finally Federal Security Service FSB. Interestingly enough, also the state security was proclaimed as the punishing sword of the party. Early Bolsheviks didn't hold it in high regard. When Lenin knew that Chekists in Odessa were harassing Turkish visitors, he responded, "The more checklist scum we'll be able to execute on this occasion, the better." Lenin considered Chekists as dirty criminal scum, also xenophobic, which he didn't like at all. P.S. The more of X we're able to execute on this occasion, the better, is very typical for Lenin's style. It's more like, that's a good opportunity to deal with those we should have taught a lesson to much earlier. So the balance of power in the Soviet state was basically a 3-body problem: the party, the state security, the army. Stalin for a while reduced both 3 to submission by extreme violence. For example, during the Great Purge he executed 3 out of 5 of Red Marshals, 15 out of 15 of Army commanders, 4 out of 4 Navy admirals, 58 out of 62 corps commanders, and so on. In 1937 to 1938 professional military were exterminated, right before the World War II started. After Stalin's death, balance of power was renegotiated. The party struck back, reducing other institutions into submission. State security was prohibited to even think of investigating, collecting info, wiretap and so on nomenclatura. They couldn't indict nomenclatura with crimes. Just an illustration. Soviet society was full of state security informators, and OFC many uni students were recruited. How can you trust your classmates then? One hint, nomenclatura kids are 100% not agents. State security isn't allowed to approach the families of party bosses. So in 1953 to 1991 the 3-body problem looked like this. State security controlled the army, while the party controlled both. So state security had resources, had capable officers, knew more than anyone else, but it was prohibited from doing anything by nomenclatura higher-ups. That explains a funny counterintuitive fact. Radical economic liberalization of 1990s was largely planned in the Soviet era. 1. By economic institutes working under KGB patronage and funding. 2. By individual economists coming from state security or intelligence families. Consider Gaidar, the mastermind behind the market reforms and very bright guy. He was coming from Soviet patriciate. His dad was a vice admiral, equals naval intelligence. Their family lived on Cuba during the Caribbean crisis, constantly hanged out with Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. Coming of age, he became the editor of Communist magazine, of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. Although formerly a civilian economist, he was doing lots of industrial intelligence, and in 1990s he eagerly dismantled Soviet economic system. Paradoxically it may seem, the radical economic liberalization of 1990s was developed within state security. The army couldn't because any independent thinkers there would be destroyed immediately. The party wouldn't, 'cause why would they? Nomenclatura wasn't interested in changes. Counterintuitively it is. But in the late USSR, the KGB was the only real counter-elite, and most of social changes don't come from elites or from oppressed masses. They come from counter-elites, who have power and resources, but are not really in charge, and then the party collapses. I think that's the elephant in the room overlooked in many discussions on the USSR collapse. It's not that the Soviet Empire collapsed suddenly, it's that its leading and organizing force, the party, was consumed by the internal strife. That explains much of the chaos of the 1990s. Most of officials, CEOs of industrial plants, police chiefs, government staffers, suddenly broke free. Previously they were closely guided and controlled by the party, but now with no party they got completely disoriented. State security was demoralized. 2. Consider a case when KGB Special Forces squad captured an Azeri prison to release Armenian militants. For that Moscow rewarded them with 200 rubles. They were shocked, devastated, didn't know what to do. Hyperinflation turned them into beggars. On the eve of 1990s virtually all the salaried professionals became beggars. They either got no salary at all, or got insultingly small ones. That includes the army, the police, the state security. There was only one single institution that always paid on time, the railways. A typical situation for the 1990s. In small towns and in the countryside, railway workers and staffers are the only ones with cash. Nobody else, including police, gets paid because they're unimportant. Railways are important because they're what's keeping the country together. So with the country in crisis, the party collapsing under its own weight, and with state security almost dysfunctional, new Yeltsin's regime got extremely wary of the army. Yes, they're demoralized, too. But ultimately it's the only force in the country that presents a real threat. Consider General Rollin, fought in Afghanistan, in Georgia, in Chechnya. During the Chechen War he refused to grant medals and awards to troops, considering it a civil war on which no awards should be earned. When awarded as a hero of Russia for his role, he refused that, too.